So today is our last session on a grief observed. We'll be finishing it off today. Next week, we're going to start a series on worship, and we're going to start using the book of Revelation where the word comes to John. I need you to write a letter to these churches. And I want you to understand, especially the one church that says, look, you've got everything you need. You got a building, you got air conditioning, you got an organ, you got a sound system, you got an AV system, you got a pastor, you got everything you need except the one thing that's necessary. We're going to start with that verse. All right, book 1, the locked door, an empty house. Book 2, memories betrayed, a cosmic sadist. Book 3, a door no longer shut and bolted. Book 4, from locked door to mystery. Now, we have been conditioned to solve mysteries, but there are mysteries that cannot be solved. They can only be lived in. To solve the mystery of the Trinity or eternity or God is to attempt to assert control over them. In Genesis 2, when God says, I want you to name the animals, it's about control. When you speak a name over someone, you are asserting control. This is why when our mothers wanted to get our attention, they used our full name. It was an assertion of control. There are times when we must live by a faith that has no other choice but to say, I believe. Now help me with my unbelief. Now, I'm going to show you about a 5 or 6 minute clip from the movie Shadowlands. And if you get a chance and you can find it on Netflix, or I encourage you to watch the whole thing. It is the entire story of C.S. Lewis and everything that we've been covering up till now and beyond. But I'm going to show you the part that begins right after she dies. And I want you to listen very carefully. And the sound quality is not great because it's actually very soft. But listen very carefully to how he responds unapologetically as people try to console him.
Yeah, I wasn't going to come, but then I thought I would.
Life must go on.
I don't know that it must, Harry, but it certainly does.
I'm sorry, Jack.
Thank you, Christopher.
We're all deeply sorry.
Thank you, President. Anything I can do? Yes, just don't tell me it's all for the best, that's all.
Only God knows why these things have to happen, Jack.
God knows, but does God care?
Of course. We see so little here. We are not the creator.
No. We're the creatures, aren't we? We're the rats in the cosmic laboratory. I've no doubt that the experiment is for our own good, but it still makes God the vivisectionist, doesn't it?
Jack.
No! It won't do. It's this bloody awful mess, and that's all there is to it. I'm sorry, Harry. I'm sorry, Christopher. It's just not fit company tonight, that's all.
Jack? Yes? Your grief is your own business. Maybe you feel life is a mess, maybe it is, but there's Douglas.
What about Douglas?
Talk to him.
I don't know what to say to him.
Just talk to him!
Hi.
Hi.
When my mother died, I was your age. I thought that if I prayed for her to get better, and if I really believed she'd get better, then she wouldn't die. But she did.
It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
I don't care.
I loved your mother very much. Perhaps I loved her too much. She knew that. She said to me, is it worth it? She knew what it would be like later. Doesn't seem fair, does it?
I don't see why she had to get sick.
No, not me. But, you can't hold on to things, Douglas. You have to let them go.
Jack,
Mm-hmm.
do you believe in heaven?
Yes, I do.
I don't believe in heaven.
That's okay.
I sure would like to see her again.
Me too. Oh. Hello. Who are you?
Chadwick, sir. You're my tutor this term.
Am I? Chadwick. Right, come on. Chadwick, you say?
Yes, sir.
Sit down. We read to know we're not alone. Do you think that is so?
Well, I hadn't thought of it before like that, sir.
No, nor did I. I suppose some people would say we love to know we're not alone. Would you?
Well, if you mean falling in love, well, I haven't really. I mean, I probably know more about love from books than from personal experience.
Go on. I'm listening.
Well, I don't think any of us want to be alone.
Why love if losing hurts so much? I have no answers anymore. Only the life I've lived. Twice in that life, I've been given the choice. As a boy and as a man. The boy chose safety, the man chooses suffering. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal.
It was that conversation with his stepson that forced him to ask questions of himself that he didn't want to ask and also wasn't prepared to answer. Now, if you've never met God, but suddenly came into his presence, how would you describe him? I'm thinking of Moses, Elijah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Paul. Stacked rocks, golden calves, snakes on a pole, fire, wind. Why do we try to make God knowable? Why do we try to personify him? We want to give him our attributes so that he's more understandable, because We think we understand ourselves, or we think we understand others. So now, if God is like me, then I can put on him my thoughts, my feelings, my doubts, my fears. These things become dangerous when they become icons. We talked about icons a few weeks ago. An icon is that which we began to worship as though it is the real thing. In 2 Kings 18, verse 4, they come across this people, and they have this giant pole with a snake on it, and they have to break it into pieces. Now, this is the pole with the snake that God had Moses raise up so that if you were bit by the snake and if you looked at the pole and believed, you would not die. And the people took this and they forgot about God and they made it the object of their worship. Until the point where no longer was God even in the picture. Now the snake on the pole was the God. In Colossians 1:15, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. How then do we describe or imagine God without getting ourselves into trouble? This is where we back up. Because when we have suffered a loss, when we are analyzing something which is so far beyond our ability to imagine or understand, we try to bring God down to our level. 4, verse 24, special short of no answer. When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent certainty, not uncompassionate gaze, as though he shook his head, not in refusal, but waving the question like, peace, child, you just don't understand. C.S. Lewis has moved from anger and even a certain disbelief or unbelief. And then he said he got to the door, and not only was it closed, but he heard it being bolted from the inside. Then he began to wonder, was there anybody on the inside? If there ever was anybody on the inside. Now he says, now all of a sudden, when I ask God these questions, it's not that God is holding out his hands and saying no, but rather more like, you can't possibly understand. What is the difference between ignoring you and waving you on? Can or will you accept that you cannot accept or understand what you need or want to know? This is one of the hardest things. When we are confronted with something. So I'm a Star Trek fan, and one of the things that Star Trek is known for is the Kobayashi Maru incident. And that is where this is an unwinnable situation. It is set up so that when they are putting prospective commanders in place, and yes, I know all this is in theory and it's fiction, but it is set up so that there is no way to win. No matter what the commander chooses, he's going to lose. Because they want to know how he handles losing. And in Star Trek, James T. Kirk goes in, reprograms the computer so he can win it. That's how he shows about losing, by reprogramming things so he can't lose. But what God wants to know is, how are we going to handle things when we lose? How are we going to handle things when we cannot explain something? When something truly is either a miracle or simply unknowable? And why do we think that we have to have someone to blame? Or that knowing all the facts will make us feel better or allow us to accept what happened? Can anything actually explain and make us feel better, even if we were to know everything? Every time there is an accident, Multiple investigations are launched. People are constantly investigating. There's all sorts of scuttle going around as people guess about things. And people keep saying, you know, if you read the newspaper, they say they haven't finished the investigation. Then 2 years later, the family will say, there's things they won't tell us or things they don't know. When President Trump released a whole bunch more of the John F. Kennedy assassination things, everybody was sure that there was something in there that they were hiding about aliens from space or who knows what. Because we always assume that if we just have one more piece of information, that we'll say, oh, well, that explains it. I'm done. I'm moving on. But the truth of the matter is, even when I have all of the facts, every bit of information from every possible angle, if it was a tragedy that affected me, I cannot nor will I accept it. But I don't want to accept that I'm not accepting it. I keep thinking that if I can point my finger and say it was that person's fault, now I feel better, but I don't. Or if I knew everything, oh, well, this happened because that happened, because that happened, because that happened. And even if, by the way, I work to fix all those things so it never happens again, it still happened, and I suffered loss. Can a mortal ask questions which God finds unanswerable? Quite easily. I should think all nonsense questions are unanswerable. How many hours are there in a mile? Is yellow square or round? Probably half the questions we ask. Half our great theological and metaphysical problems are like that. See, we think we're asking God these great things. We think we've spent all time and all of our energy trying to come up with the question to ask God. And most of the time, it's like asking, is yellow square or round? It sounds so wonderful to us. But the question becomes, how are we going to live in a mystery? Because we can't always explain it. Sometimes we just have to live in the mystery. We have to accept that it's a mystery. We may not like it. It may make us feel uncomfortable, but that's part of it. Part of the reason that we are uncomfortable is because the mystery says that we must always be prepared for things that we don't know are coming. Sometimes, Lord, one is tempted to say that if you wanted us to behave like the lilies of the field, you might have given us an organization more like theirs. But that, I suppose, is just your grand experiment, or no, not an experiment, for you have no need to find things out, rather your grand enterprise, to make an organism which is also a spirit, to make that terrible oxymoron a spiritual animal, which is what we are. And I love the fact that C.S. Lewis, even back then, could have edited that part out when he said a grand experiment. Oh, wait a minute, it's not an experiment because you already know everything. So this is instead, no, your grand enterprise. But you see, by thinking out loud and by saying what he's thinking, we realize we're not the first one to have this thought. God, is this an experiment? Wait a minute, no, God doesn't need to experiment because he already knows how things are going to turn out. So this must be an enterprise, a plan, and therefore it's known to God, but unknown to us. And this is that problem. See, if we did not have a spirit, if we were not worried about what happens next, then we would simply suffer. There would be no question to ask. There would be no unanswerable questions because we just wouldn't care. But because we really do believe, Ecclesiastes 3, eternity is set in our hearts, because we feel that this is not the only life, that there is something else, we are asking our questions because we don't want to miss out. I won't ask if you do this or not. But you see, when I get to the airport and I've got 2 hours and it says that my flight is departing from gate B8, I walk all the way to B8 to make sure that B8 gate exists. Then I will go and get some food or whatever I need to do. But I want to make sure that the gate exists. If somebody says, meet me at this place, I will show up early just in case I misunderstood. So that if all of a sudden I realize I'm at the wrong place, I have time to get where I'm supposed to be. That's what this feeling of spiritual eternity. God, I know there's something beyond this life. At least I am praying that there is something beyond this life. And C.S. Lewis has asked the question, do you believe in heaven? And he says, yes. And the young boy says, I don't. But I really want to see her again. And now he's torn. Maybe I don't believe in a heaven, but I want to see my mom again. And the way that I would see my mom again is heaven. So how do now I rectify these two things? And those are the first steps of faith, where we step out of who we are or what we were into what we want to be or what we shall be or need to be. There are those who say they wish to know the future. But I want you to think about what a burden that would actually be. Imagine that you actually do know the future, whether it's only 20 minutes into the future or whether you have a vision a year or beyond into the future. Could you, if you knew for a fact that something terrible was going to happen to somebody and you ran into that person, could you greet them and keep a neutral face if you knew that this was their last day on earth or tomorrow something tragic was going to happen? And could you not tell them? See, we want to assume the knowing of the future is so that we can change it. But is that the purpose? And can the future be changed? In other words, if we know the future and we warn someone so that what we thought was the future is no longer the future, wouldn't you think the future would know that we knew that, so therefore that was really going to be the future no matter what? This is where we're constantly struggling with our concept of time and God's concept. 1 Peter 1:10, concerning this salvation, the prophets who spoke of the grace that was to come in you searched intently and with the greatest care, trying to find out the time and circumstances to which the Spirit of Christ in them was pointing when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves, but you, when they spoke of the things that have now been told you by those who have been preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit, sent from heaven. Even angels long to look into these things. Peter is saying that the prophets were given this vision, and they studied it. But they couldn't fully wrap their arms around it, because even though they could see it and they know it, just like John in the book of Revelation, and Daniel, they can see it, but they can't fully wrap their arms around it, because even though they know it is what shall be, they're still struggling with how it is to be. Because it's never enough to just know. We still want to think that we have control. And so once we recognize that something is going to happen, how can we influence it? How can we change it? And then he adds in the end, even the angels long to know this. In other words, when God says, this is the book of Revelation. In the end, God wins. You're going to heaven. You're going to be there for all eternity. Satan loses. And yet here we are struggling with that concept, even though it's written and it's truth. And so we're constantly trying to rearrange it. Well, I know what it says, but I think this. Or, yeah, I know that it's not real clear, but I've decided how it should be. And God says this is how we are constantly arranging all of these things in our life. Lord, are these your real terms? Can I meet H again only if I learn to love you so much that I don't care whether I meet her or not? Consider how this looks, Lord, how it looks to us. What would anyone think of me if I said to the boy, no toffee now, but when you've grown up and don't really want toffee, you shall have as much of it as you choose. God, I need to know the answer right now. And you're telling me to wait. But when I wait, how do I know I'll need to know or will care about the answer? So why can't you just tell me now? Then the only way that I get to see her again in heaven is by saying that I understand that that's not what this is all about. And now that I come to think of it, there's no practical problem before me at all. I know the two great commandments, and I'd better get on with them. Indeed, H's death has ended the practical problem. While she was alive, I could, in practice, have put her before God. That is, could have done what she wanted instead of what he wanted, if there'd been a conflict. What's left is not a problem about anything I could do. It's all about weights of feelings and motives and that sort of thing. It's a problem I'm setting myself. I don't believe God set it me at all. 2 Samuel 12. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought while the child was still living, we spoke to David, but he would not listen to us. How can we tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his servants were whispering among themselves and realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied. He is dead. Then David got up from the ground after he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now that the child is dead, you get up and eat. David answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will eventually go to him, but he will not return to me. This is what C.S. Lewis was saying. The whole time that H was alive, he could bargain, he could plead, he could work extra hard, he could pray more, he could do all these things, hoping that God would change his mind. But now that she's dead, now the struggle is only about him. And this is what David says. Well, now that the child is dead, I eventually will go and see the child because I will die. But the child's never coming back to me. So I need to go on about my life. It's often thought that the dead see us. And we assume, whether reasonably or so, that if they see us at all, they see us more clearly than before. Does H now see exactly how much froth or tinsel there was in what she called and I call my love? So be it. Look your hardest, dear. I wouldn't hide if I could. We didn't idealize each other. We tried to keep no secrets. You knew most of the rotten places in me already. If you now see anything worse, I can take it. Here is where, by the way, back when Luther was around, people prayed for the dead and prayed to the dead. Not just saints, but they prayed to the dead. Somebody asked Luther after the Reformation had taken place and the Lutheran Church was becoming. And they asked Luther, I said, should you pray to the dead? And Luther's response was interesting. He says, you don't pray to the dead, you talk to the dead. He says, you talk to them until you realize that you've said everything that you needed to say. And he wasn't saying that the dead were listening. He wasn't saying that the dead were going to respond. But often when someone dies, there's things that we wished we'd said, wanted to say. Luther said that if you want to call it prayer, fine, but he says you talk to them and you say what needs to be said so that your mind begins to settle. So here he is, and he's saying, okay, H, if you can see me, and you see me perfectly, I can handle it. Because you already knew that I wasn't perfect. Is our understanding of God and our willingness to surrender the point of everything, is it only when we don't care that we finally get what we want? Is death a test? And if so, what's the answer? And this is one of the things that we struggle with. When someone we love dies, when someone we love gets sick, when someone is taken out of our life, God never tempts. And he doesn't always create the test. Sometimes the tests are created, sometimes by Satan, sometimes just by circumstances, sometimes by choices that we made, not necessarily now, or choices that someone made or someone else made, and we simply are in the impact zone. But if the death of a loved one is a test, what is the answer? And this is one of the hardest things that we will ever come up with, because it requires us to see beyond ourselves. And if you'll remember in that clip, life must go on, and C.S. Lewis responds, I don't know that it must, but it does. And then when he tries to, the pastor tries to console him, he says, I don't want to hear that. We're just creatures, lab rats. And he's just being honest, because he knows that everyone wants him to feel better. And the only way for him, and by the way, they want him to feel better, not so that he feels better, but they don't want to deal with the feelings that they're feeling. So when we go over to somebody's house or we see someone who's just lost a loved one, when we're trying to figure out what to say, it's often because it's awkward and we're hoping that we can end the conversation because we really don't want to just sit and be a listening ear. And it's hard. And so we try to come up with a platitude or a biblical saying that's just going to make everything okay. And C.S. Lewis was honest. He said, it's not going to work. And this is where when his friend chases him down, and he says, your grief is your own business, but you need to talk to the boy. And he says, what am I going to say? And he says, just talk with him. Grief and pain and loss are not easy to explain, but should they be? And if they were, what would be the point? If we could explain our pain, if we could explain our loss, if we could write out a 15-word sentence and say, it's perfectly explained, would that really make us feel better? See, when I'm hungry, if I eat something, I feel better. If I'm tired and I sleep, I feel better. But then I'm going to get tired again, I'm going to get hungry again. And so when grief takes away, when something is taken away and I have this loss and this grief, if I'm able to get a salve, it can only make me feel better for a few moments. And then I'm going to feel it again. And it will be lesser and further spaced apart. But if this person really was what I say they were in my life, it's going to be impossible for me to replace them. And so to pretend that everything's okay is exactly that, a pretense. The fruition of God, reunion with the dead, these can't figure in my thinking except as counters, blank checks. My idea, if you can call it an idea, the first is a huge, risky extrapolation from a very few and short experiences here on earth. Probably not such valuable experiences as I think, perhaps even of less value than others that I take no account of. Shakespeare said, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? What should we compare God to? What should we compare our loss to? What shall we compare life to? How do we narrow it down in such a way that we can simply state it in a very short way? My idea of the second is also an extrapolation. The reality of either, the cashing of either check, would probably blow all one's ideas about both. How much more one's ideas about their relations to each other into smithereens. In other words, no matter how brilliant and how intelligent as our explanation and comparisons seem to us, they aren't even close. See, we think we've got all these great ideas. We write these fantastic books. We've got everything figured out. And God simply steps in and says, you're not even close. And this is what C.S. Lewis, because he was such a brilliant mind, he was quick to dismiss all the things that pastors often tell people about loss. When he sat down to write this book, and actually it was a series of all these different books that he then put together, it was all about the raw feelings. And he was just being honest. The mythical union on the one hand, the resurrection of the body on the other. I can't reach the ghost of an image, a formula, or even a feeling that combines them. But the reality we are given to understand does. Reality, the iconoclast once more. Heaven will solve our problems, but not, I think, by showing us subtle reconciliation between all our apparently contradictory notions. The notions will all be knocked from under our feet. We shall see that there never was any problem. We love to challenge God. Hey, God, Lazarus died, and he went to heaven for 3 days. And yet the Bible says that no man can look upon your face and live. So how is it possible that he went to heaven where you were and saw you, and yet he lived? We love to come up with these type of things. We think we're so brilliant by challenging God to all of these. You know, is God so big that he can make a rock that even he can't lift? We think we're being so clever. And what C.S. Lewis says is that when the reality of heaven shows up, and the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting, we'll realize that there never were any challenges or problems. All of them were simply in our head. Because we either did not have the ability to grasp or the knowledge we needed, or we were placing barriers because we did not want God to deal with us that way. We had in our own mind. And more than once, that impression which I can't describe except by saying that it's like the sound of a chuckle in the darkness, the sense that some shattering and disarming simplicity is the real answer. If you remember this goes back a few weeks where he said, we think we're alone in a dungeon, but then we can smell the sea, or we can hear the ocean waves, and we realize we're not in a dungeon. Or we're in pitch black, so black that we cannot literally see the hand in front of us, and yet we hear the chuckle of a voice, and we realize we're not alone, and we recognize that chuckle. We know it is somebody we know and we love. So here we are in the darkness of our grief, our pain, our loss, and we hear God chuckling. Not because death is funny, but because our attempt to analyze it and solve it is. And God chuckles as he holds out his hands and says, my child, peace be with you. Once, very near the end, I said, if you can, if it is allowed, come to me when I too am on my deathbed. Aloud, she said, heaven would have a job to hold me, and as for hell, I'd break it into bits. She knew she was speaking a kind of mythological language with even an element of comedy in it. There was a twinkle as well as a tear in her eye. But there was no myth and no joke about the will deeper than any feeling that flashed through her. Would you come and be with me on my deathbed? She said, neither heaven nor hell would be able to keep me from it. If you want to know what the greatest quote in the entire book is, it's this one. I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. The original title of the book probably would have been An Anger Observed. because he was so angry at God and himself. And he was angry at H for dying, and he was angry at the boy for living, and he was angry at all of his friends who didn't understand, and he was angry at the world and angry at everything. And finally, anger revealed her name. She said, "My real name is grief." When you read that quote in there, you go, now I understand. Because you see, we think we're grieving, but the truth is we're just angry. And it's not until we finally come to the point where we realize that the anger has to give way to grief, and the grief has to give way to peace. The last words. Didn't people dispute once whether the final vision of God was more an act of intelligence or of love? That is probably another of the nonsense questions. How wicked it would be if we could to call the dead back. She said, not to me, but to the chaplain. I am at peace with God, she smiled, but not at me. So as he remembered the final moments, she, knowing where he was going, turned to the chaplain and said, wouldn't it be wicked if we could call the dead back? Because she knew that C.S. Lewis would want to call her back. And then she says, I am at peace with God. And she smiled, not at the chaplain, not at Jack, but at God. And this is where he finally ends the book, where he realizes that it was her journey. And now as he's processing it not only for her, but also for himself. And he has to balance this. But she taught him the greatest lesson of all. It's not about bringing them back. It's about being at peace. And that is a journey. All right, as I said, this is our last one on Grief Observed. Next week, we're going to start with a thing on worship, probably take us into July. And the entire purpose of this is we're going to spend some time in Revelation, but also taking a look at the church and worship and what it is, what it isn't, what has happened to worship in the last 50 to 75 years, and where it might be going. Go in peace, serve the Lord in gladness, and have a fantastic day.